So welcome, guys, and welcome to anyone who's watching this on record. I have, David Beale's in. I have with me Katie Dunk from CrossFit Lutterworth, and we've got a few of our folk in, and people will be dropping in during this session. We are primarily going to talk today about nutrition, and we're going to talk about pre and post nutrition. But if you've got any questions at all, please do ask them. What we'll do is myself and Katie will probably just do a brief introduction about ourselves and a bit about our background, and then we'll cut straight into some questions. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to mute everyone just to make it a little bit clearer. So bear with me a second. So Katie, you can unmute yourself if you want. Sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah. So welcome, guys. Welcome, David. You could just obviously join along. Hello. So my nutrition journey is a bit mixed. I obviously followed years ago like the healthy eating plate, which wasn't necessarily the best thing in reflection. And a lot of my eating habits were formed around weight cutting for sport. So I don't advocate at all really weight cutting for sport. I think it's a really terrible thing to do. I didn't really enjoy it. And I found myself on the cusp of being in that awkward weight category where I would lose a lot of weight before a competition. I'd obviously have a massive advantage in terms of height and weight and reach and all that stuff. But as time went on, I actually found that I was more comfortable not cutting weight and actually just competing at the weight I kind of walk around at, which was better. Probably a little bit more difficult just because people are bigger and stronger. But that was fine with me. And I admit completely, I do struggle with eating. I've got some weird kind of motivations around that, but it is slowly getting better. So generally speaking, I try and eat fairly healthy. I try and eat whole foods. I try and avoid processed food. And I have, over the last 4 or 5 years, increased the amount of anti-inflammatory vegetables and not supplements, but things just to help with inflammation, because that seems to be a big marker with me. So lots of spinach, lots of kale, lots of fibrous greens definitely make a big difference for me. I'll let Katie introduce herself and talk a little bit about her, because she's got some really good diet stuff and the nutrition experience.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think JD's experience with weight cutting and then kind of still struggling to find equilibrium with just fueling and having that as a priority. And then, so my kind of background, I've got a degree in sports injuries and physiotherapy, and then I went on to be an English teacher, and now I own a CrossFit gym and blah, blah, blah. So I've got a lot of background, higher level stuff around sports, but not, didn't do a ton with sports nutrition kind of in my early days when I was studying. And it's really only since I joined CrossFit, my first CrossFit gym in end of 2009, 2010, when I first started CrossFit, that I started to learn and think and read and understand more and more about how food impacts our just everything, really. And up until that point, my relationship with food, like I would suggest a lot of people, was pretty negative and very variable, lots of ups and downs, lots of negative associations, using food as either a reward or a punishment, which is, I think, one of the biggest things that I've discovered down the line, is like the best mindset to get away from. And that leads a lot into how I approach just talking about healthy eating. So we could call, I think, nutrition is such a huge minefield, because you can go on the internet and Google and find 10 answers for any question you have, all from people who claim to be qualified in some area of nutrition. And it's difficult to sift through that, which is why, and I have my precision nutrition level 1, and I've got a paleo nutrition certification, but that doesn't really mean anything, because it's not so much about what my qualifications are. It's more about how I encourage people to do their own thinking and learning and exploring what works for you and what doesn't. But there are lots of basics that are universal truths that we know that we can move forward with and be healthier across the board. And that's kind of like, that's where I like to start talking about healthy eating and nutrition, is the basics that we can all move forward and just be healthier and better people. And then the next step on from that is actually thinking about well, how can I better fuel myself for my fitness and also to help me recover so that I can train really hard again and achieve my fitness goals. So there's kind of two levels for me when it comes to talking about healthy eating. One is just basics, being a healthier person overall. And the other one is, okay, well, now we can think a little bit more conscientiously about specifics around training.
Brilliant. Katie, do you mind, are you still paleo, Katie? I assume, are you?
Yeah, I'd say like 90, 85, 90%.
Brilliant. Would you mind just talking a little bit about that, just for people who either don't understand what paleo is, or just describe a bit about how that affects you and what you do? Would you mind doing that?
So again, paleo and the zone were kind of the two hit key in things to discuss or to be when you started, if you were a CrossFitter, 2009, 2010, and a couple of years onwards. CrossFit itself still promotes and trains and teaches the zone diet as a way of managing healthy eating for performance. But the premise of paleo, and very much like with the zone, with a couple of exceptions, is that you strip away the food groups and the things that will potentially cause you the most or detract more from your health than other things. And a lot of people struggle with, and I could just use some really basic examples like gluten sensitivity. So in paleo, you tend to avoid most grains, not all grains, but most. Another reason for that is because of the amount of pesticide use in the farming and the cultivating of the crops that are grain-based, because that all obviously leaches into what you're then eating. And a lot of it all comes down to trying to generate and create the best gut health possible, because there's a lot of research and we know that gut health links to pretty much everything else in your body and your brain working optimally. So things that disrupt gut health would be a lot of grains. For a lot of people, it's gluten. Even if you're not celiac, you might have reactions that you don't necessarily associate with that. Dairy, which can be really problematic for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. I've actually had, I run a Whole30 every January, which is pretty much just stripping this stuff away and then reintroducing it to learn what affects you and what doesn't. And the number of people who have inhalers because they're asthmatic, and by the end of the month, they're not asthmatic anymore and they don't need their inhalers because the dairy causes respiratory issues for some people, not everybody. Obviously, a huge part of it is cutting out refined or added sugars, and looking at more natural sources if you're going to have any at all, like maple syrup or honey, and then high quality places to find that. And then legumes, which is another thing. And I think most people know, if you have beans, it makes you gassy, right? And that gassy side effect is your body going, nope, this is not optimal for me at all. It's not a natural side effect to food that you eat. You shouldn't become really gassy. That's your body going, I'm not dealing with this well. And there's a byproduct of your body trying to break it down. So there's loads of stuff around paleo and why removing those larger food groups can ultimately lead to better gut health, and then helps you just in your day to day. I know, because I've been doing it for so many years now, there are some things I can have and it doesn't negatively impact my body. And there are things that I really can't, because it just messes me up so bad. So for me, I can have like hard cheeses, but soft cheeses, because it has a higher lactose content, just gives me bad stomach. I have an egg intolerance, so I can't have eggs, which is a big old pain in the ass. I also know that I've got a gluten intolerance, but I can have non-glutinous grains like rice without too much trouble, but they do make me feel a little bit sluggish. So I'm just really in tune to how things impact me. It's not a low carb Atkins thing at all. It's just about consciously choosing what I suppose supports your body best to function and doesn't just mess you up. Because there are a lot of things we eat on a day-to-day that really mess you up. And if we go back to CrossFit and how that links to what CrossFit recommends anyway, it's, the tagline is you eat, some meat, lots of vegetables, some meat, nuts and seeds, and no sugar, a little starch and no sugar. And the no sugar thing is huge, because we know that sugar in all of its forms and all of the things that it gets put in these days causes illness kind of across the board, especially when consumed as much as we tend to mindlessly consume sugar at the volume that we do. So yeah, that was quite a long-winded, actually, paleo.
No, it was good. It was really good. And I think the thing, Katie, about the gut, you can't understate that, because I think there used to be a broad assumption that if you eat the right foods, then everything's all good. Whereas I think what people are realizing now is like, and you know, like you say, there's a lot of research now that's saying like your gut is like almost like a second brain. So when people think about, well, eating certain foods, you know, makes you feel a certain way, and even people talk about mental health now, it's like your gut it learns how to be in a certain way. So it learns to digest. For example, if you eat a lot of sugar, certain bacteria starts to grow in your gut, and that affects what you crave, what you want, and how you process other things. So we're all probably familiar with hearing, you know, that if you have an intolerance to something, like certain like, for example, my dad, for example, he doesn't process iron very well. So he can take iron tablets till they're coming out of his nose. But at the end of the day, he doesn't process it because his gut doesn't react to and respond well to it. So it's almost like thinking the gut bacteria thing, I think, is such an important, or just the gut generally, because we can for years and years be thinking we're doing the right thing by eating the right foods. But if we're not getting a good balance and we're not aware of what's going on in the gut, we can be like, it's almost like throwing away your money because you're eating good foods, but your body's not able to process them. So then we feel sluggish. We're not generating the energy for recovery. So gut bacteria is so key and so vital. But I think it's something that people just talk about, but they don't necessarily understand the importance of. And then when you throw in the fact that everyone is so different, and people can be in different can be at different points of their journey. So, you know, they might be clearing out there's lots of negative gut bacteria basically that we get through eating, like you say, processed foods, and they actually get a grip on you. So they affect your behavior, they affect your mood, and you know, you'll hear people say, "Oh, I just really fancy, you know, having a Diet Coke or whatever," and it's like there's more and more research coming out to say, well, we need to be mindful about what type of gut bacteria we have. I mean, they've done fecal transplants for a long time where they would literally take poop out of people and inject it into other people to try and recalibrate people's gut bacteria, which, you know, shows you the importance of it. But I think it's something that's worth considering if you're eating foods and you're not feeling great, and it's been a while, it's worth considering what you are eating. But like you said as well, Katie, it's a minefield out there in terms of if you go onto Google and search, you know, if I typed in Polish Jamaican genetics best diet, someone's going to have put something out. Oh yeah, you just need to eat 3 elephant ears a day, and then, you know, some celery and a squirrel's butt, and you're like, what the hell? You know, there's so much stuff out there. It's easy to get kind of confused with it. But no,
definitely, and everybody is very different, and every, you know, a lot of it comes down to the two things is gut bacteria, your microbiome, and then also just hormones and how your hormones are affected by your gut, but also just things like insulin spikes. You know, remembering that your brain responds to sugar, especially, the exact same way it does to cocaine or any other hard drug, which is why it's so addictive and so hard to not have for the amount of time that you might try to stay away from it, and why it's such a tricky thing, because it's a drug response, but that can't be good.
No.
You know, you think about what that does to your brain. It's really interesting. One of my favorite pieces of there's kind of two of my favorite pieces of research that I came across real early days when I was just reading around. And I think that's the thing I recommend the most, like, you know, read and assimilate and try to see how you feel. And this is just general health. We're not talking about health for performance and whatever else. But interesting. So, you know, kind of go along the lines of backing up the paleo approach to things. You know, if you look at archaeological sites and digs, you look at the remains, skeletal remains of pre-agricultural revolution societies, especially in Western culture, there's just no evidence of things like advanced tooth decay, cancer, and certainly in the way that it would leave marks on bones and remains, and other kind of degenerative diseases along those lines. And then all of a sudden, you look at the remains in some of these cultures post-agricultural revolution, where they're consuming grains and farming them. And all of a sudden, we've got diseases popping up in these remains that just weren't there before. And it just begs the question of, you know, what's changed and how does that impact our health and just this general concept of illness and versus wellness. So I always find that very interesting. And again, you know, looking at sugar, and actually fat's another really good one. It makes me really sad when people buy low fat or fat free stuff, because fat's just not the enemy. Fat is actually so very important for you, for us, for fuel, and for our brains. And low fat stuff basically is just a chemical shitstorm, because if you take that out of a product that has it in it, you have to somehow make that palatable, and that's just all chemicals produced, right? Sweeteners and all sorts of things to make it the right thickness again and to make it last on the shelf for a long time. And if you look at the trends, so when all the kind of the fat-free, low-fat was really, really popular, and I'm thinking it's kind of like, you know, somewhere in between my grandparents and my parents' age, where that was really, really popular. Everything was fat-free, low-fat, slimming, whatever. But the increase in degenerative brain disorders, kind of in that populace, increased a lot, because your brain needs fat to function. And if we don't give it fat, it will not function. It will slowly die and wither away. And that's where we see, and obviously it's a general sweeping statement. It's not the only reason why people get these things, but it's an interesting trend that you can associate to and make some, extrapolate from the fact that we know we need healthy, good, wholesome, like non-messed up, genetically engineered fats in our diet to just be, you know, good functioning brains.
I think something to expand on what you were saying just before, you talked about the findings of, you know, prehistoric man, whatever. The fact that if you see sugar as a drug, or even MSG and all those things, it really does make sense in terms of eating for well-being is something that if you eat for well-being, you've got to be sensitive to your body. Now, I never forget this. Like, I'm a massive fruit bat. So to me, fruit's not really food because I eat too much of it. So it's like when we were young, we'd be like, we're hungry. And my parents would be like, eat some fruit. And we're like, it doesn't do anything. We've eaten 3 bananas, 5 apples. Now, my favorite fruit probably has to be pineapple or mango. And that to me is probably the sweetest it's going to get. Now, I'll never forget, I remember I was eating some pineapple, enjoying it wholesomely. And then I had drank some Coke. And I drank some Coke and I went back to the pineapple and I was like, oh, I think this pineapple must be off. And I'm tasting it and I'm like, it tastes. And then I'm like, hold on a second. I've just gone from the world's natural sweetest thing, which is natural, and it allows me to go, I enjoy this. I then just took a swig of Coca-Cola, which has probably got treble the amount of sugar. So when I've gone back to the thing that I really like, it doesn't taste the same. So what I'm actually learning is Coke's the best thing because it tastes better, it feels better. And actually, over time, what we don't realize is instead of us actually going, I don't feel great, we have some sugar and it makes us feel better. But our actual sensitivity to well-being goes down. So like you say, if you see it as a drug, so if you get given like, if you got given cocaine in the morning, you're going to feel great. It's going to be like, yeah, feel good to go. Do you know what I mean? Off you go. And then you function at a certain level. And lunchtime, you start to get tired. Oh, I don't need to eat anything. I'm just going to take some cocaine. Feel great again. And you say, well, you know that's not going to last. You're going to eventually start to break down. And if you think about it, that's exactly what does happen with people. You know, they get addicted to sugar. And I'm not saying like you have to completely, you know, be the kind of person that, you know, you're at a birthday party and someone comes over and says, oh, do you want some cake? And you're like, get away from me, you heathen. You don't have to be that way, but it's understanding like where you can make those improvements. And part of what I was going to talk a bit was mindful eating, because that's something that we delved into big time when I went over to Plum Village for my Buddhist retreat. And I found it very refreshing, and I do believe it does help. Just being aware that you are eating, taking your time to eat, and thinking about where your food comes from. And actually, the more natural your food is, and the less processed it is, the more enjoyable that process can be. So there's something around, and these are parallels that flow into lots of other things. Learning to be grateful and have gratitude for things is a big thing. And sugar almost is the opposite to that, because we do become addicted to it, and we like it. It makes us feel good, and it can give us this state of feeling like, yeah, I'm good for this. So another example might be, I got into the trap. I don't do it anymore, but I used to get into the trap where I'd be like, I'm tired. I don't want to go training. I'll have an energy drink. So I whack an energy drink, boom, caffeine, sugar, I'm ready to go. And my body's not ready to go, but I think I am. So then I go and smash a workout. And then it's like, okay, I finished the workout. That was good. I feel strong. But actually, my body's like kind of rattling a bit. And it's like, okay, I can only do this so many times.
Mm.
So learning to listen to your body, I think, something that comes with age and with a bit of wisdom and with experiencing different things. But understanding if you can lower the amount of sugar you intake, or the other thing with a way of looking at it is like understanding when you are going to indulge. If you understand, it's not so bad. So I'm just thinking about poor Vicky sat there going, I should have had those donuts. But it's like, at least you're aware that you're having them. Do you know what I mean? It's one of them. So it's all about understanding your body and what it is that you're having and how it's going to make you feel. I certainly feel now that if I eat a lot of sugar, the next day I do feel sluggish, and but I'm almost thankful I feel that way, because if I don't feel that way now, the impact it's going to have later on is going to be worse. So I've definitely become more sensitive to it. So
I think it's just awareness, and then in perspective is the most important part. You know, and I could literally, and I think I've done it before, I could just talk all day long for hours and hours and hours about, you know, how passionate I am about exploring all these different things and learning and understanding about how foods impact your body. But often that's not the most helpful, immediate information for someone to have when they're thinking like, well, I'm not very good with mine. You know, I'm not very mindful about what I'm eating. I don't really understand what's healthy and what's not, or maybe not to the depths that I want to. And it's really simple. And the important thing is to not be so like, you can't be 100% restrictive. And if you ever try to do that, it's not going to last, because you fall off the bandwagon. So that's like mistake number one. If you're going to tackle something and you're like, right, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to never have these things again, well, that's crap. And you're setting yourself up for failure. So don't even try, because A, we're human. B, we're surrounded by yummy things, which they're yummy. Like I would have a donut, but I would be prepared for the fact that it will mess me up for a good few days afterwards. But I'm making that conscious choice to understand the cause and effect. I know that it's going to mess me up. It doesn't stop me from having it every once in a while, but it does stop me from having them all the time. And I think that's a really huge mind shift. It's not demonizing foods. It's just understanding what impact it's going to have on you. And then you make a choice, because we're fucking grown-ups, right? You do what you want, but as long as you have the knowledge to back up your choice and understand the repercussions, then you can maybe do that a bit more consistently and mindfully. You know, nobody eats enough vegetables. Well, that's step number one. Like, you should have vegetables with every meal. I like to think of breakfast as meal number one anyway. I had salad the other day for breakfast. You know, it's just fuel.
Yep.
Every color of the rainbow you can try to squeeze in is the other really easy rule of thumb for vegetables, because then we're thinking about getting all of the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that we can possibly get from vegetables, which are, you know, there's more than I could rattle off. Do you need to know what they're all called? Absolutely not. All you need to think about is colors. Have as many different colors of vegetables as you can. You're going to hit most of them. Dark greens are very, very good. So if you have nothing else, have something that's dark green. Easy peasy. Have it be half your plate. Even easier. Good quality protein sources, and then carbohydrates that are as close to nature as possible. So if you could dig it out of the ground, or if you could harvest it without having to do too much to it, it's the best possible option for you. So things but potatoes, rice, quinoa, which is an ancient grain, that kind of stuff. The more processed you get, the less optimal for health it is. It's not terrible for you, but it's less optimal. So that's where like pastas and breads and stuff like that comes into play. And that's a really simple way to look at, well, how am I making the most optimal food choices? Fats are really important. So having a little bit of fat, good healthy fat with every meal is important. Again, as close to its original source as humanly possible. The more something has to be manipulated to take the form that you're eating it in, the less optimal for your health it is. So like, for example, something like goat's cheese, a soft goat's cheese, not a lot's being done to that to turn it from goat's milk into goat's cheese. But if I'm looking at something like whipped cream from a can, there's all sorts of stuff's gone from turning that from milk into the thing that you're about to have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And
so if you can trace the thing to its origin with like maybe one step. That's all. If it's the, if you literally could just dig it up, wash it, and then eat it, even better. And that's just a general rule of thumb. And then you just try to do that 80% of the time. And then the other 20% of the time, you be human and you enjoy the things you want to enjoy. And you understand that they might give you the runs or an upset stomach or make you really unpopular because you do nothing but fart.
Yeah.
And those are just the basic side effects, not even like the deep health ones, but you know what I mean.
Vicky's just asked, what about oils?
Sure. So oils is a really good one. I always recommend.
Katie, a lot of people cook with the wrong oils, don't they, Katie?
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to, if you're cooking with oils, you got to make sure that they are safe at the higher heat points. And a lot of oils, especially the cheaper ones, become carcinogenic at the high heat points, even though they say, you can cook or fry with these. So the safest ones will always be a high quality olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, and then some nut and seed oils. You don't want vegetable oil, canola oil, any of that fake stuff is not derived from nature. It comes from a lab or it's been really messed with. But I only ever use olive oil, coconut oil, or avocado oil. Those are the only three that I have in my house. Or goose fat or like beef dripping. If it's genuinely from the animal, that shit's awesome. Like that's how I make my roast potatoes. My kids have those like every week.
Yeah. And this is the thing that I find fundamentally crazy, that, like you said before, Katie, years and years ago, I mean, I remember it being taught in the UHL, so United Hospital Leicester, the healthy eat plate, and it literally saying things like, don't have butter, have margarine.
Oh no, margarine. That's my biggest.
Yeah.
My biggest distress.
Don't have full fat milk. Have skimmed milk, and it was so nailed into people. And I mean, I'm always a bit of a skeptic anyway, but the speed at which I mean, even actually, this is about 2 or 3 years ago. I still heard it in co-op. I heard them going, you can reduce the amount of fat in your diet, and I was thinking, are we still doing? I was like, they're still doing this in co-op.
It boggles my mind.
But the oils thing really threw me, because I was like, because my mom's a bit of a guru when it comes to like medical stuff, so she's always been really shit hot on using coconut oil and stuff like that, and she's always said, don't cook. Like you say, certain oils do, and she's a dentist, so I guess she sees the effects of different things with teeth and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a really interesting one, because people wouldn't think twice about just whacking some oil into a pan and cooking it, and then that's it. But you've already set the things into motion, but not necessarily cause it there and then, but over time. The other thing is inflammatory markers and how those things affect. So when you were talking about grains, I mean, quinoa is a godsend in terms of it behaving and tasting probably like most of your rice and stuff, but the inflammatory markers are very low. Yeah. So what we mean by inflammatory markers is some foods that you eat mean that inflammation is greater in the body. So the more, not as a general rule, the more processed stuff is, the more those inflammatory markers most likely are going to be higher. There are some things that just inflame. And I don't know, you'll have to correct me with this one, Katie, but I know that when people were talking about there was a stage when people were talking about omega-3, 6 and 9. And I was always taught that omega-3 is the one you want, and 6, and there's a couple, 6 and 9, that are actually inflammatory. Yeah. So again, in the effort of trying to balance stuff out, the health industry kind of got it wrong. Rather than actually looking at inflammation markers and stuff like that, they kind of just sort of, get the balance of everything. And actually there's a specific way, a healthy way of looking at things. And like you said, like, it's the first thing I learned in biology, and I'm sure Anne did when she did her biology stuff, is like lipids, your fats are so important for so many different things. It's like, it's not even just, but people think in their mind fat on the body. They don't think fats for your brain, for all your cells, for regulation of osmosis. So like, water, everything. So those are really important things. The other thing I want to say quickly is, when we talked before about nutrition, the more complex, or the more variety you have in your diet, the better your body processes it. So if you were to just eat one food solely, so let's just say you're just going to eat porridge oats, and that's all you ever ate, then your body digests that quicker and quicker and quicker. Whereas if you had porridge oats with a banana and some nuts and some seeds and some different things, it's like your gut takes longer to digest it, but also digest it better because you've got an interaction with different things. So that's where the zone comes in, because they talk about every meal should contain protein, fats, and carbohydrates, as opposed to eating just one food source like a Snickers, which would be just simple sugars.
I mean, I think that's, if you think about your plate, and again, just apply it to every meal regardless. If you think about having protein, carbohydrates, healthy fats, and then wherever you can, just a bunch of vegetables. And I think the hardest one for people, honestly, is breakfast for that, because we tend to be really habitually formed to the whole vegetables for breakfast, unless it's a fry up and you've got, like, I don't know, mushrooms and tomatoes, which is totally fine, by the way. And you're going to pretty much nail it that way. And if you mix that up as much as possible, like my comment with as many different colors of the rainbow as possible with your vegetables, that's about variety, and it's about getting as many different nutrients as you can and keeping your body guessing. But yeah, if you eat literally just chicken every day, all day, that chicken's going to stop doing as much for you as if you mix it up with fish, pork, the occasional yummy steak, et cetera, et cetera.
No, that's good. I think I'm a bit of a conceptual learner, if you can call it that. And something that I guess it was the beginning of this year, I started to think to myself, in the same way with CrossFit, we train and we go, right, sometimes we do strength stuff, sometimes we move fast, sometimes we move slow, sometimes we work skill work, sometimes we pull, sometimes we push. If you start to think of your food like that, and you say to yourself, okay, if you were to write down in a 6-week period, maybe not 6, maybe 4-week period, everything that you ate, like as in you list everything, you would want that to have breadth and depth. And a lot of people probably don't have that. If you think about, if you itemized or looked at your shopping bill, if you're not experiencing all those different colors, like you say, all those different vegetables, it's thinking about, well, that's kind of the same parallel that you can slide across and put over training. Because if you only train strength, you're going to get some strength gains, but you need to do accessory work. And I almost think like eating is a bit like training in that respect, because you're training your gut. So your gut needs to be able to manage these different molecules, these different vitamins, minerals. And when I start thinking about that, it feels a bit easier for me, because I think to myself, well, I've not had a sweet potato for a week. So I'm going to have sweet potato next week, and I'm going to do this and that. And it feels like small little wins along the way, as opposed to, like you said before, an unrealistic, regimented meal plan. And there's nothing wrong with it. If that works for people, fair play to them. But I always remember a lad that I worked with who was a bodybuilder, and he had the Tupperware, and he would eat the same thing day in, day out. And I was like, fair play, man. But like, I would struggle with that, because I get bored and I get uninterested in it. But if I think of my diet as training, so I kind of go, right, I'm going to have, quinoa, sweet potato, normal potato, possibly like pasta at some point. And then vegetable wise, I'm going to work my way through a kaleidoscope of different vegetables over a period of a couple of weeks. That kind of works well for me. And you're going to have your key things in there, like you say, like your kind of probably your protein sources and your carbohydrate sources. But learning how to vary them doesn't have to be as strenuous as thinking like there's a right and a wrong. Because if you know that you've got a good selection of different vegetables that you can put them in however and add them. And I do think there's like, it becomes enjoyable to do it. I mean, that's the big strain. We used to have a girl called Sam Small, and she was fantastic at making the most amazing salads. And she actually made one in front of us at the box once, because I was like, how do you do this? It's a witchcraft. But she'd got the skill down. So when I tried to make, and in fact, I'm just going to really quickly, when I was at Plum Village, I sat down for the first time eating. So we're eating vegan food, so everything's like vegetables. And I looked at my bowl and I was like, this looks rubbish. And I looked over at this monk's bowl, right? And his was like, looked amazing. And I was like, where did he go? And I'm like, he went to the same place I went. We all eat from the same place. But the way in which he selected his food and put it onto his bowl, he did it in an artistic way. And it's like, how often do we actually think about that? Do you know what I mean? Because I often don't. I just whack it on the plate. But now I'm getting a bit jazzy. I'm like, I might get a pickle gherkin and put it with my beans on toast.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I might get a bit of it does, doesn't it?
Really does help.
Yeah. So I think thinking of it like that as training, and then varying what you've got is a good way of kind of trying to make sure that you get a broad spectrum of different things. And then, like I say, if you can keep things like sugar down and eat well, you'll then start to become hypersensitive to what your body does like. So I've got this really weird ritual at the moment. I've got a big kind of water tanker, and I fill it with hot water, and I get fresh ginger and I chop it up. I put a ginger and lemon tea bag in. I put maple syrup in, so it's a little bit sweet. I chop some fresh lemons up, and then I get loads of turmeric, right? And I whack it in. And I actually really like the taste of it. And then as time goes on, I eat the ginger, because the ginger gets, a bit sweeter with the thing. And like, I know that makes me feel better. But it's like anything. It's like, it's easy to get out of the habit of drinking, staying hydrated. But if you can find a fun way of staying hydrated, it really does pay its dividends, and especially over time. Because that's the only other thing I was going to say was we want sometimes instantaneous gratification from food, so it tastes great. But the other way to look at it is like, when we're eating well, it gives us that slow burn, good feeling throughout the days, like helps us sleep and all those things. So they're all things that are worth considering when you're thinking about eating.
And if we're more thoughtful about the makeup of our main meals, then it really does help. Because I think one of the biggest pitfalls for people is falling short, having that blood sugar drop, and feeling quite desperate, and then grabbing a convenience thing that is going to spike your blood sugar back up, which will always be junk. And it's, if you head yourself off at the pass and fuel yourself with all of those wholesome things, you're going to find yourself in those situations less and less and less and less, because your insulin production, stabilizes, and you can actually fuel yourself, especially on the good healthy fats and the quality carbohydrates that don't spike everything up and down because they're so crazy processed. It makes such a huge difference. And over time, you just get to the point where you're like, oh, do you know what? I haven't felt like I was going to pass out and die and desperately needed a Snickers in a while. That's really quite cool. Which is like the ideal optimal place we kind of want to be with fueling our bodies just on a day to day, just on that day. You should never be at that point where you're like, fuck, I'm going to pass out. I need some chocolate right now. Yeah. That means that we've dropped the ball fueling ourselves at some point in the day.
And I for one can definitely, and have been there for a while. I've got to the point where, eating wise, I've relied on coffee and caffeine to keep me high. Mm-hmm. So I'm just like plain sailing, I'm feeling all right, and then I'm training and I'm like, I feel like shit. I can't maintain a good output on the rower or whatever I'm doing. And I'm thinking, what's going on? I'm like, oh yeah, I've not eaten today. Now, like, the severity of that isn't alarming, and that's alarming. So it's like, it's a deep-rooted thing, but I'm learning slowly, actually it is a slow burner to take care of yourself. Katie, have you dabbled with treat versus cheat meals? So like, obviously some people go, right, I've eaten really well all week and now I'm going to have a cheat meal. So then they like go crazy. But then the problem is obviously that there's a massive whack, and it's like, MSG hits you, you feel like shit again. You go like, I need cocaine. And then it's like, you go crazy.
For me, and when I work with anybody, just talking about kind of just, food habits and health and everything else, I try really hard to get people to stop thinking of food as reward and punishment, because that creates or exacerbates a negative relationship with food one way or the other. So I would rather people just, be mindful for as much as possible, but don't be so restrictive that you get to a point where you have to just stuff your face and go crazy because you've just pushed it for so long. So it's just about finding that balance. And even when, you do have something, it's okay. And you don't need to justify it because you're eating for wellness.
Yeah.
Almost all the time. So if you would like to have the donut, or if you are going to have, I don't demonize alcohol consumption, by the way, I applaud it, especially in these times. But you can make more thoughtful choices about what you have to lesser the impact on things like your performance or whatever else. And that could be another session, because again, this could go on forever otherwise. But you don't demonize it. It's not a punishment, and you don't need to earn it. So like, and it's getting out of that thing of, right, I have to go for like a 10K run because I had a pizza and a donut yesterday. And you're like, no, you don't. you ate what you wanted to eat that day, and now you just need to go back to eating for wellness again, and just understand that that's just how it works. Constantly thinking about punishing or making up for something you've had, or preparing because I'm going to have this, so I need to really bust my ass now. Again, it's how you think of and associate food and your emotional state and your physical state. I just don't. I think it just helps us to perpetuate an unhealthy relationship and understanding of food. Like,
Yeah.
just be human, have a
Yeah,
donut,
definitely.
and then have lots of vegetables and your nice protein and your healthy fats, the same as the same as you would always do. That's okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not demonize it. So that I think that just the cheat day, it's that reward. It's that again, you're messing up your system anyway from overloading it with just tons of junk.
Mm. And
And
sometimes you can kind of put a more of a, so for me, it's like, what I'll do is if I wanted to reward myself, I'd be like, you know what, I'm going to get a decent, for me, it's probably curry goat, if I'm honest. It's like, we don't really get a goat a lot.
Curried goat.
Pardon?
You said curried goat.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to be weird. That's going to be weird to you, isn't it?
Well, I'm not weird, just a little different.
Okay, so like it's like a West Indian thing where we have goats at the end of the garden, and we feed them stuff and they eat it like rubbish. So they eat your rubbish and stuff, and then when the goat like goes meh, farts and then falls over and dies, you basically chop it up and then you put curry over it, turmeric, and then you basically boil it up. But the thing for me is curry goat with some rice, and with kidney beans and that sort of thing, to me is not necessarily the same as like, or me ordering a Chinese which is like filled full of MSG. So if I can find ways of saying, well, it's more of a treat than a cheat, because actually, or get a nice bit of steak, and I'm actually going to take my time to cook it, and I'm going to make some time. That's a nice way, like you say, of kind of incentivizing, but not making it this kind of like, oh God. Because if you plan to,
you should never feel bad about it. I think that's the main thing. Like, you shouldn't feel like you have to punish yourself.
Yeah.
Or that, or that you're dangling it so that you can absolutely beast yourself.
Yeah.
And then you get to have that thing, and it's having just a more positive relationship. Very much like that idea of, I'm going to have something very nice as a treat.
Yeah.
Not with like, I don't have to re-earn that back or anything.
Yeah, it's like and that's why I was thinking about like training, Katie. So let's say you've planned to train 5 times in the week, and you've got to Tuesday and you're like, I couldn't train today, and then it's like, oh, it's all over, I'm not going to bother with the rest of my training regime. And like, sometimes that's what people do. Some people will be like, right, I'm going to eat healthy this week, something goes wrong and they've got to get a takeaway or whatever, and then suddenly they're like you say, that perpetual cycle of, I'm beating themselves up. It's like, but they've got to let go of that, because it's like, okay, tomorrow's another day. I've still got the rest of the week. I've still got 80%, 90% of my time that I can still eat well. And I think the more you forgive yourself, not forgive yourself is that's the wrong way of thinking, but the more you can be relaxed in terms of knowing that you're doing the right thing 90%, 80% of the time, the better you're going to be anyway. And actually, probably the less likely you're going to feel like you need to, because you're going to start to see the bigger picture. You're going to start to see, oh, I felt good over the last 2 months, as opposed to, I felt great for like, a day and then felt horrendous afterwards. So that's brilliant. I'm just going to open up the floor. Has anyone got any questions they would like to ask? If so, like, unmute yourselves and ask. I know, David, you've got a question. Come on, bro. Let's hear it.
Have you heard, I keep reading stuff about protein and getting old, and this idea that, like, it's to have protein with every meal versus when you get old, your body's ability to deal with it means you're better off having a big lump at the end of the day. Heard about that? Any views? I'm confused.
I would always vet the resource or the source of that information first and foremost. So where was it published? Who did the research? Et cetera, et cetera. Just first and foremost. I'm not familiar with that in particular thing. I'm familiar with similar concepts that have been published and that float around. Because it depends. what that research was. So for example, if that research was done on a population of relatively sedentary older people who have health conditions related to being relatively sedentary and aging, then, you know, reduced kidney function or difficulty dealing with more protein and how that relates, blah, 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 perhaps. But then we need to look at how that would be relevant to you and actually your health and dynamic. I think a lot of this stuff isn't actually considering people who go out of their way to stay active and fit and healthy in their later years either, bearing in mind that, yes, things absolutely change as we get older, hormone production changes. But for the most part, and from my understanding, and again, I'm not a doctor, is that as you age, you know, if you don't use as many grams of protein in your day that you ingest to then regenerate your muscles, et cetera, you just pee them out. Unless you have underlying health conditions or kidney function issues.
So if we part the protein bit, Katie, what about just meal sizes during the day? And sort of thinking about intermittent fasting and stuff.
Oh yeah,
what,
sure.
What do you do? Do you like even it out through the day, or do you? Because I tend to skip breakfast often, sometimes skip lunch, or if I do have lunch, it's quite modest, and then really go to town with dinner in the evening.
I think that it's very individual, and you need to, and for you personally, so intermittent fasting is a really interesting thing. Lots of people will say they do it and to great effect. Personally, I don't eat first thing in the morning. I have more of like a brunch, kind of early afternoon, and then I'll have my lunch later afternoon, and then I'll have a smaller dinner because things sit heavy for me overnight, and I don't like that. Partly to do with my routine, partly to do with the fact that I'm not that bothered about eating first thing in the morning. Some mornings I wake up and I'm ravenous, and then I'll eat. I listen to my body more than anything else, you know. But if you need to do some experiments, you know, so you might feel okay because you become accustomed to kind of not eating until dinner. And then let's just take a day where you do a CrossFit class as an example. Do that, see how you feel in a CrossFit class. The next week, try eating smaller meals, maybe mid-morning, mid-afternoon, then train, see how you feel. So it would just literally, because if you got to think of it as it's you're fueling your body. And if you're fueling your body in a way that's optimal for you, then that works for you.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that the discussion point of special populations. So a lot of research, unfortunately, isn't conducted on, like Kate said, athletes. And by athlete, I don't even mean people who train CrossFit I mean people who are active. So I know, and this is a bit of a side tangent, that a lot of my Parkinson's patients, for example, they get recommended to not eat protein during the day, purely because a lot of their medication, if you imagine if they eat protein, the medication can't go into those protein slots. So they actually have to avoid protein, have their medication, and then eat their protein towards the end of the day to help them recover. Now, I'm not saying that's the case, but you can make an argument for almost any method of eating. And I think the skill is to look at that method, like Kate says, go back to the resource, look at who it was done on, and then over time understand what the principles are that underpin that. So we know protein helps with recovery. We know that our periodization cycle, if you like, of how we eat and how we train, we can optimize that. So if we had to do a run or we had to compete and be at our best, we would have to train for that. We'd have to eat for that. And then there would be, obviously, sleep would play a part in it. So I think you look at like your well-being, your fitness, how you feel fitness-wise, how you sleep, and look at as many variables as those main variables over a period of time, and then tinker with, you know, eating times, things like, you know, your meal size, David. So, for example, like if it's working for you to have like a small meal and then they gradually increase as the day goes on, brilliant. But sometimes it's kind of saying, and I'm guilty of this, is like, I can think, well, this is working for me. And it's like, is it though? It's like, do I know what optimum is? Because like I said, I learned how to function in an exhaustive state.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that's optimum. It's just that I can do it. So it's like, I can drive my car with my knees, but just because I can doesn't mean it's a good idea, especially going down roundabouts. So I think having a play with your training, and sometimes maybe having a performance element. So it might be a 2K row, or it might be, you know, you do a run, David, and see how you feel. It could be even looking at, you know, injury patterns or things like that crop up, and note them. And then over time, you kind of get a blueprint. But the good thing is, David, you are looking out there and you're considering it, and you guys are here. And that to me is the start of the basis. There's lots of people who blindly follow a method, and they do it for years and years and years, and they never question anything. And that to me is like a strange thing. And it might just be that method works for them. But I think looking around, trying new things, and then tinkering is kind of the way.
Yeah, and I think being really informed with what you try, with what you are trying, and understanding what the premise is behind it, rather than just going, oh, that, you know, the cabbage soup diet, I'm going to try that for a week, see what happens. You know, if you mindlessly just follow something you've seen, you're not going to understand even what you're looking for in terms of outcome. So just, you know, doing that reading around, looking at where sources come from, but then having a way of testing, as JD said, like performance, and actually understanding, because it's so, like, our bodies are incredible at acclimatizing to whatever situation we put them in. You know, so growing up, I was a vegetarian for a very long time, so I ate loads of beans, loads of cheese, and loads of like pasta and stuff. And if you had asked me then, I would have never said that I had a gluten intolerance, because I ate gluten all the time. It was only once I cut it out and then had it again where my body was like, no, thank you. I really actually don't like that at all. And it's adaptation, but it doesn't mean that I was healthy then. You know, just because your body does adapt doesn't mean you magically become like a well person having those things. It actually means that your body's just like, well, fuck you, fine. If this is the best I'm going to have, then I'll just make the best of it and crack on. And you get used to feeling a particular way. So it could be that you feel like you've got enough energy to tackle stuff. Could you have more energy to tackle stuff? Could you, and it's just going to literally be about conscientiously trialing and erroring different lengths of time. Generally speaking, with like the intermittent fasting thing, especially for the longer time frames of fasting and then the shorter time frames of eating, for like fat loss and everything else, I think it tends to yield results for people. I think where that will stop working for a lot of people is when you're trying to be athletic,
yeah, 100%.
And have performance.
So my pattern of eating during the day is really driven by lifestyle rather than consciously thinking about fueling my body. So what should I be doing eating around workouts before and after?
You don't need nearly as much on board as you might think. Really short-term pre-workout, and JD, correct me if you think that I'm way off base, but even just having like a banana, an hour, 45 minutes before your workout should give you enough energy on board that you shouldn't need like the energy drink or something to get you through, assuming that you've fueled, enough in the day at all before then. If there's a gap, I mean, I don't like to eat anywhere near training unless I'm just lifting. If I'm just lifting, then I can eat just before, it's not a problem. Maybe not deadlifts, but I don't want to WOD on a full stomach, because who would, right? Burpees and box jumps and stuff, when you can taste what you just eat in the back of your throat, sucks. So having something that's good energy, easily digested, within the hour window before you work out should just about do you.
Yeah, 100% agree, Katie. And I think the thing is, okay, this is the thing I find about performance. Okay, so I would say 6 weeks out, I would start to eat really well. We would do intermittent fasting. So we would finish, last meal would be say 6, sometimes train after that. And then as we start to get towards competition, start to taper. So I go into calorie deficit quite a lot in the last 3 weeks, but we're training really heavy. And then unfortunately, the last 2 days is dehydration time. Now, we would dehydrate, it would be ridiculous, like 8 or 9 kilos off. We weigh in, right? And once we're weighed in, we rehydrate with Diarrhea and 4 liters of water. So we kind of suddenly reappear because we've disappeared. Now, over the last 6 weeks, I've eaten really well. I've primed my body, as in I eat really strict and stringent and just well. And I am fit as a fiddle, and it's never a case of me going, oh, I need something to eat. In your mind, you think, I need a good meal before training. But if you imagine how animals work and operate, an animal that hunts It's not like an animal goes, oh, I'll go and eat a load of stuff before I go hunting. Like, we can function really well and at a high level if we are continuously looking after our bodies and eating regularly over, you know, a couple of days. We can still perform well. So I think the tendency for me used to be this belief that I used to have a meal 4 or 5 hours before in order to perform. But then when, like I say, when I look back and I think, actually, it's more important what I've done over the last 3 or 4 days in terms of eating. And then beforehand, you know, like a banana, that's way sufficient for me to train at my optimum. On the other end of the scale, if I've not eaten well for 2 or 3 days, and then say 12 o'clock, I have a massive meal, and then 5 o'clock I go to train and I feel like shit, it's like, well, I've not been fueling for the last 3 or 4 days. And that one meal isn't going to do the fueling for me. So I do think it's this kind of slow, continuous drip feed through. I believe I completely agree with Katie. It's like, you don't need necessarily a lot of fuel. I know people will carbo load before, like, say, an extended endurance event, like a half marathon and stuff like that. But even then, I do think it's more important over what happens over time. So this is another consideration, that when you start to look at your training and you think, well, how many times am I training per week? What am I putting in my body? When am I putting it in? So that you're not having one day where you feel on top of the world and the next day where you're crashing and burning. You kind of want that kind of continuous, like, you know, you don't have to feel great all the time. But yeah, I completely agree with Katie on just a banana's good enough a couple of hours before or an hour before.
And then, you know, post workout, that's really where, if you think about it, you know, that meal after a session is where you are giving your body the tools to recover so that you can train again, to build muscle, to repair what you've done, to restock your fuel stores in your body, your glycogen stores in your muscles. So, you know, that little bit of energy with that banana, quick sugaring kind of carb and fruit form, and then a really good, wholesome, well-rounded meal with proteins and carbs in particular, you know, is spot on. There's so much out there, you know, there's shakes and there's, you know, but you can absolutely, if you're not going to eat for ages after a workout, a shake's great because it means that you are getting that stuff into your body to help your body to start the repairing process. But you don't have to. You can just go and eat a meal, you know, afterwards, and that will do everything you need it to do. Especially if, you know, we're doing CrossFit just to stay like fit and healthy. So yeah, I think there's just so much out there. It's energy bars, protein pancakes, protein shakes, protein this, protein that. And it's like, yeah, but protein's good, right? We don't need nearly as much as you'd think based on all the protein products that get pushed at us. And it's just more important to think about that consistency across your meals, that you're getting everything that you need, as JD said, that consistency. And then, you know, if you need that little spike, banana's perfect. Or like a naked bar, something that's got that kind of fat and carb, high sugar, but not sugar.
Not processed.
Processed. And then crack on with
on that point about protein that you just said, Katie. So I keep saying it's like a gram or a gram and a half or 2 grams per pound of, you know, depending on how much strength training you're doing and stuff.
Yeah.
For me, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's I struggle. You know, if I actually work out what I eat, I struggle to. I don't. You know, lunch might be 3 or 4 poached eggs on a big salad or something, and then have like a big steak or a big lump of fish in the evening, and I'm still way short.
Yeah, I mean,
so should I be having like the odd scoop of whey protein during the day?
You know, and again, all like the most, I think, poignant thing I could say to that is try it and see if you feel any better. If it doesn't make a difference, then no, you don't need it. You know, it sounds like you're having a really good array of protein across the day. I mean, I try to have, so if I very rarely have porridge, because actually I've learned over time, I fuel much better if I start my day with fats and proteins, but not a lot of carbohydrate. So that's just me personally. So if I do have something like porridge, which is just like out of desperation because there's nothing else in the house, I will add collagen peptides, which is not whey protein. It's collagen is protein, but it's a different form. It's unflavored. So I'm putting my protein in there, and I'm going to add some peanut butter for fats and maybe a bit of maple syrup just to make it not taste like shit. And that will be it. But I've gone out of my way to add the protein and the fat in there because I know that if I just had that carbs, I'd feel like crap. It makes me feel really lethargic for the day. And that's just me. Some people thrive on starting their day with porridge, but I have to manipulate it to make sure I've got that balance of my protein and my fat. For me,
I think like there's probably a bit of, in the same way we had this, oh, you shouldn't eat fat and all this stuff. I think we're kind of still in the echoes of the bodybuilding profession saying it's all about protein. You need protein, and I think and all these calculations about this is how much protein you should have. I almost feel like it's reminiscent of the BMI and all those things that were created, like not fictionally, but just kind of as an idea. And then people run away with them and talk about them. So I kind of agree, Katie. I think if you try to get too strict with things and do what the recommendations are, it's more about, are you performing well? Are you feeling good in your training? Is your strength improving with your strength program, whatever you're doing? And don't worry too much about adhering to the specifics, David, if it's saying, well, this is what someone should have as an average, because again, everyone's different in terms of how they process things. So if you don't process protein well because your gut bacteria is shit, so it doesn't matter how much protein you take on per kilogram of your body weight, you're probably kicking it out. And then if you're not doing the appropriate training, or if you're heavy on, let's say if you've got no carb or no fat inside that and you're just having protein, it's kind of like, well, using it differently. So sometimes I do think it's like, again, trial and error, but then take everything with a pinch of salt, not literally, but like, just think about it, think if it works for you. Guys, has anyone got any more questions just before, because I know that we're running on people. Yes, Vicky.
It's just Sam's question, really. I better ask it, otherwise it'll turn me off. I think you probably answered it, and I think I probably know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. He's more concerned like, is his diet enough? So like we're quite basic, but really, like, so we both have the same breakfast. So I'm an overnight porridge person, and it's more just convenience than anything. And he's got like his shredded wheat. He'll have that, go to work, off he goes. And then it's basically like a pack up lunch of just 2 ham cobs, 2 pieces of fruit, and a cereal bar. And then we do Hello Fresh in the evening, because again, we found that's like natural and it's less wastage, like a lot. So the dinners are varied, but obviously what we're doing for breakfast and lunch is very same. So is that enough in terms of fueling us for the workouts that we're doing in the evenings, or should we be trying to look at like that varied approach that you guys are talking about? Like, what is that enough basically, or is there anything more that we could do to change?
I'm going to push this to Katie, but just before Katie answers, I'm just going to say Vicky's a physio, so she's on her feet a lot of the time, and normally, like, walking across wards and helping people stand. And then Sam's an electrician, so I do think that your job, that what you do during the day, does matter. So, like, if you're on your feet all day and you're moving, like, Sam, Coach Sam, being a plasterer, I mean, you imagine how much he talks anyway. Imagine if he's talking at work, all the calories he's burning. That's why he's just literally McDonald's all the time. Because if I believe that some people, their BMR, their basic metabolism is so high because of their activity during the day, they might need to make those adjustments. But you go, Katie. I just wanted to let you know what Sam did.
That's 100%. That's 100% spot on. People's caloric need. Your base metabolic rate is what you need to consume to just be and not change one way or the other, not to get bigger or to smaller. But you can get bigger in a positive way in terms of muscle growth and strength gains and stamina gains. So it depends what your goals are. If he's happy with his progress in terms of his lifts and everything else, and he doesn't feel like at the end of the day, if he doesn't fall asleep in his chair before he gets to eat his tea, and he's got the energy to be, then, in terms of the number of calories he's having, he's probably okay. I would generally say anyone who's a laborer should probably be having, a lot more calories than you'd think would be healthy for a human being to be having, just because of how much they burn in a day, especially if on the younger side as well. You're just going to need that to function. I'd be surprised. And again, I don't like to throw numbers out there because figuring out macros for people and calories is so specific, and the formulas that exist on the internet are so crap. 2,500, 3,000 calories a day without even worrying about it for someone with that. Not, obviously I know nothing else about him, height, weight, size, age, et cetera, but as a rough rule of thumb.
He's a beast.
Use a big, and again, the bigger you are, the more you need.
I was feeling there was quite a lot of judgment about that massive box of donuts that you showed us yesterday, Vicky, but maybe you can be vindicated now.
I really think I'm going to mention it because every time there's been like a snack idea come up, it's been donuts. I'm thinking there's still 2 left that I've got to eat and get rid of. I'm like, it's making me feel guilty.
Just enjoy them. Enjoy them because they taste amazing. It's okay. But variety is important for a lot of reasons. And I would suggest that in order to fuel him through the day, if he starts his day, and again, this is, you just have to play around with it, but I would say start his day. It's like, okay, farmers, right? I come from farming country, dairy farmers especially. And I used to go and spend 2 weeks at my friend's dairy farm, and they'd get up at the crack of dawn and they'd have steak and eggs and vegetables and milk straight from the cow for breakfast every day. And I mean, like, they'd have 2 steaks each and eggs and everything. And these people were skinny, but they worked. They were on their feet all day long. But they literally worked all day, and then they came home and then they ate a big meal. And it's because they started, they fueled, right? They pumped their bodies full of what they needed to be able to function for the rest of the day. So there's something to be said for that, I think, depending on what your day is going to look like. And it's something to play around with. You know, wake up a little bit earlier, have steak and eggs for breakfast. Epic. God, that'd be amazing every day for breakfast. God, amazing. And see how he feels. You know, if he comes home and he's not exhausted, or if he's able to go and then tackle that workout and actually come out and still have some energy to spare, you know, then we know that you've done a good job nailing the fueling for that. So definitely play around with it. And variety is important for so many different reasons, but it's hard when you've got to marry that with convenience. I mean, pre-planning at the weekends is always going to be my top tip for anybody.
Yeah.
Think about what you're going to do for the week.
No, that's helpful. No, thank you.
Brilliant. Anne, have you got a question? You need to unmute yourself, my love. Unmute yourself.
Let me unmute myself.
Yes,
No, it's just really interesting to me because I see all these words bandied around and I actually almost refuse to read about them because it's just so much. And I do love butter. I have whole milk because I just think they are natural and healthier for that reason.
Yep.
But I want to learn more after your sort of conversation about paleo, about what that really means.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we should do, because back in the day, I would do like a nutrition talk once a year or something, and I'd always get Katie to come over to do paleo, because I know lots of people who will talk about paleo, but they don't do it. Whereas Katie is the guru. She does it. She lives it. She breathes it. She's raised her kids on it. And I remember even Katie, you talking about how Willow's behavior was, you know, some of her mates are having this and that, and they're going nuts and stuff, and Willow's quite chilled out. So, yeah, I mean, that's probably something that at some point, Katie, if you could do that, that would be brilliant. Just because,
yeah, absolutely. And I can give you a couple of places to do some reading as well. I mean, again, if you put paleo into Google, you get a bajillion things pop up these days. But there are a couple of really good resources, people who've been around for a long time, who, again, you know, are kind of the 4 founders. The Paleo Solution is the name of the book that I read first.
Oh, is that Rob Wool?
So there's 2. There's Cordain. Lawrence Cordain is actually the original paleo diet author who did lots of research, and Rob Wolf is his protege, and he has a website. But yeah, so the Paleo Approach and the Paleo Solution are their 2 books, and they were absolutely brilliant. And I really like, though he's gone off in a slightly different direction now, but there's a guy, and actually, David, you might find this interesting. His name is Mark Sisson. And he wrote the Primal Blueprint. And he's a little bit more
former elite triathlete.
Oh, I mean, he is phenomenal, right? As a human being, as an athlete, as a masters athlete, and as an increasingly aging man who still could kick everybody's ass. You know, he's a really interesting guy to follow in terms of his lifestyle. So what I really liked about the Primal Blueprint was it talks so much more about lifestyle integration and not just food.
The most compelling thing I've ever seen on this was, have you seen Terry Wall's TED Talk?
No.
The MS woman. It's really good. I mean, she had MS. Yeah. She had like late stage MS, and then basically put herself on a paleo diet. Yeah. And recovered. Yeah. Well, and then did a TED Talk about it, and now everyone in the conventional medical community has said, "Oh, no, she's a charlatan." It's like giving all these MS people false hope.
I know.
But if you watch
so
the TED Talk, it's absolutely compelling because she's like, well, what's going on in your body when you get MS? And it's like the breakdown of myelin in the brain. Okay, well, what does the body need to make myelin? It's like it's omega-3s, it's sulfur, it's this, it's that. How do I design a diet to get that stuff? And it's the paleo diet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of my more recent areas of interest, specifically within paleo, is looking at autoimmune issues and the autoimmune protocol within paleo specifically to fix illness and create more wellness. And there's so many things that people suffer with: IBS, Crohn's disease, Hashimoto's. Yeah. There are lots of things, and lots of people suffer from this stuff. And looking at and taking food as medicinal as much as it is for overall health and wellness, and how you can use that to really, I mean, it's really incredible, and it's so compelling, and it's really difficult to discount the power that your food has on your health. I mean, personally, I can say, you know, that just with my I wouldn't even call it irritable guts, but I know that I have issues with certain foods. I know that I'm sensitive to nightshades, and I've only really uncovered that after researching specifically down the autoimmune line of paleo, because if I have, which is ridiculous because I'm half Italian, but if I have too much garlic and tomato, I have horrific heartburn. And like my stepdad made a pizza once, and I swear to God, he must have put about 3 entire bulbs of garlic on this fucking pizza. But I've never had heartburn like that before in my life. And I made the connection. I did a bit of playing around, and I definitely decided that, you know, some of these nightshades caused me trouble, especially if they're not cooked in the right way or if they're cooked at all. So it's just so incredibly interesting, and it's so powerful. Food is medicine, or removing certain foods to increase your health because they're detrimental to your health. So it's a really, really fascinating line, and not everything will be relevant to you and your personal system, but learning about it and actually being mindful about what you're taking in and how it might make you feel, and then making it's just cool. I just find it so awesome, you know, that you can, I mean, you've got people who are pre-diabetic or newly diagnosed with diabetes, and you start to follow more of a paleo diet, and then it's gone. You're no longer insulin dependent, or you never get to the point where you're insulin dependent because you're not fucking up your insulin levels and your adrenals with sugar constantly, because it's in everything you buy, unless you're being really
I think somewhere along the line as well, there's another thing about, and this is something that I remember speaking to a lad, and this lad, I won't mention his name, just because he was a good friend, and I've not spoken to him for years, but he's gone his own way on his own nutrition thing. And his favorite thing is just slamming people for doing nutrition stuff, which I was kind of disappointed, because that's what he does, he slam people. But anyway, I once turned to him and said, do you think it'll ever become about how you eat? And he was like, nah, you just chuck it in your mouth and chew it. And the more I kind of think about like my experiences, like I say, with like going to Plum Village and then listening to how people do things, I think the mechanics of eating are insanely important. In the same way, if someone says to you, I need to get stronger, and you go, just go and do some squats. If they don't know what squats are, what they're going to do, they're going to go on the internet, look at someone doing a squat, and then try and do it. Well, actually, like, what we know is, if we look through history, a lot of our eating rituals are a ceremony. You know, we say grace, we appreciate our food, and we've fast become a population of people that, you know, I've often eaten when I'm driving. So I'll eat a sandwich and I don't even know I've eaten the sandwich. So I'm looking around, did I drop it on the floor? And I'll put it in my mouth because my mouth's too big. And it's like, if you are not consciously aware that you're eating because you're thinking about something else, that's definitely going to affect how you digest it, because your body is one vessel that's interconnected. And we know that your limbic system, so your emotional center, is attached to everything else. So if you recognize you're about to eat, like you imagine your animals, you know, you put food, they start to salivate. And a lot of the time, how we process, how we eat, how we think about food can affect it. So this is the beautiful thing about, you know, even having this little talk, is like, it's getting us thinking about it, making us think about what it is we're doing. And I think that has a massive impact. So, you know, like, I know I've kind of gone off a bit tangent with the mindful eating, but just being aware and being appreciative of the process of eating, I think, plays a massive part in that.
If you don't enjoy what you're eating, but not because it tastes amazing like a candy bar, but if you don't enjoy the whole process, you're going to be a lot less invested in it as a whole. Or if you think you're being really healthy, therefore you're eating plain boiled rice and chicken and peas, and it's bland and uninspiring, that's not going to add to your health, because you're not going to be able to keep it up, and it's not inspiring you. It's not, food should enhance our day on a number of levels, right? You shouldn't be eating something that you hate because you think it's better for you. But what we can do is think about, well, what should I be having in a day to make me ultimately healthy? Now, what do I want to use to do that? How can I make that, spices, and not, I guess, not settling for the stuff that's going to be uninspiring and then lead you ultimately to not sticking with it. So the whole ceremony of it, the process, the investment in it, I think is important.
It's the mindfulness and paying attention thing. Tara Brach, the meditation teacher, said something that stuck with me. It's like you craving the chocolate ice cream. So you get the chocolate ice cream and you have a spoonful and it tastes amazing and it's incredible. And then you have the second one and it's still good, but it's not quite as good as the first one. And by the time you've had 10, you're just on autopilot, and then you've reached the bottom of the tub, and 75% of what you've consumed hasn't registered with you at all. So she was just like, have the first 5, put the lid back on, put it away.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. So very relevant.
No, awesome. Well,
it doesn't sit well with me though.
I mean, I come from Vermont, which is where Ben and Jerry's ice cream is from. So I am a firm believer in that they are single serving containers. It doesn't serve my waistline very well.
Vicky celebrates. She's like, God, yes.
No.
That's all good.
I try not to keep them in the house for that reason.
Terrible.
It's hard not to stock up when they're on sale.
Thank you so much, first of all, Katie, for doing this. It really does mean a lot, and it's always really inspiring. And the other thing as well is about having these kind of conversations. Now I'm like, right, I'm going to go and mindfully eat, and I'm going to go and prep for next week, and it does help that whole kind of motivation system. So that was brilliant. Thank you for your time, Katie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I could talk about it all day long if you didn't know.
Yeah. What I'll probably do is I'll probably put a link again, Kate. I'll send it to you because I haven't worked out how to upload stuff to YouTube yet. Yeah, I know. You're gonna have to do me a video, Katie. So I've not worked out how to do that, and my Zoom account slowly running out of memory or whatever. So I'll send you this link, and if you don't mind putting it on YouTube for me, that would be amazing, mate. Really brilliant. But also thank you guys for joining us and adding to the discussion, just because again it's really good to get your ideas, your views, and brilliant stuff.
I mean, and if anyone has any specific questions or wants to have any more conversations or just has anything, I mean, pass it on to JD and pass it on to me if you wanted to ask me. I'm on the other end all the time too. So I'd be more than happy to carry on any dialogue after, if you fancy.
Thank you.
Awesome. And I think Katie will try and do these regularly, won't we now? I think that's what we were planning to do. So next week or whenever we'll have a different topic and we'll keep them going. I could listen to you forever, Katie. You just got such a good voice and you're articulate and you got the good knowledge as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh no, my pleasure. Thank you for doing these with me. It's good.
Cool. Right, guys, have a lovely evening. Everyone enjoy your McDonald's.
Thank you both.
Jerry.
Cool. Take care, guys.
Bye, guys.
See you later. Bye.